And now let me share my screen. So it's good to see everyone today. It's good to have a nice crowd, even on a federal holiday weekend. And we're here starting a new Mishnah. You know what? I'm going to, just one second. I want to, can I do this? Oops, that was wrong. How did that happen? Oh, what? That, sorry. If people can mute themselves, that would be great, because I was trying to do that and then I totally messed up my screen share here. Going back to we're on page 70 in the Koran. And I'll say the bracha while doing this. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
So we're dealing with, here we go. Dealing with what we can sell to Gentiles. So we're starting a new Mishnah right here. These are the items. Let me just make it a little bit bigger if I can. Okay. These are the items that are prohibited to sell. Yeah, isn't that grammatically correct? These are the items that are prohibited to sell to a Gentile at any time of year, as they are used specifically for idol worship. So there's an H there. These are the items that are prohibited. See, the editor was terrible. It's one thing in one spot to have the mistake, but to continue the mistake down into the notes here. Okay, one is never permitted to sell to idol worshipers items that are specifically used for idol worship. This restriction applies nowadays as well. And the sources are Maimonides from his collection of halacha, from the Shulchan Aruch as well. So the authoritative halachic sources, you cannot sell anything that's used specifically for idol worship. Okay, so this is at any time of year, as they are used specifically for idol worship. And what are these objects that you can't sell? Eats terubalin. So there's language there, and the Gamara will talk about this too. Eats terubalin, from the Greek strobilos, which means a rounded or circular item. The term can refer to a variety of rounded objects, including the cones of a particular type of pine tree. The cedar cone, which was considered to have healing properties, served as a special offering for Asclepius, the Greek god of medicine. It was also used in other rites and mysteries, such as the rites of Cybele and Attis. Okay, and so here's an example of a Roman statue with a pine cone on the staff. So eats terubalin is any kind of round object, but maybe pine cones especially. Benot shuach, petotarot, frankincense, and a white rooster. Now, there's background on the white rooster. So these are the things you cannot sell because they are specifically used for idol worship, and you can't sell them at any time. Many pagan rites, here I'm looking at white rooster in background, many pagan rites involve the use of white animals. White roosters are one of the offerings sacrificed to various deities, particularly in the rites of Asclepius, the ancient god of medicine. So, white things. So, in our Bible, the vision of the Messianic era, like how we know the Messianic era is upon us, is that the prophet Elijah is going to come back to earth. So just a footnote there. In the book of Kings, prophet Elijah ascended to heaven in a fiery chariot. So did he die? Did he not die? So according to the rabbis, he's still alive. and his purpose is to herald the time of the Messiah. Hence, opening the door for Elijah at the Passover Seder, having a chair set aside for Elijah at a bris. So the idea that these important moments in time, we're looking forward to Elijah coming, meaning that we're looking forward to the Messiah. So Elijah's going to come, and he's going to lead the Messiah, who's a descendant of King David, while riding on a white donkey. Okay, so that's the whole point of me bringing that up. White roosters is one thing, white donkeys we have in our tradition. Which is why, I've said before, Jesus in the Christian Bible rides into Jerusalem on a white donkey. Okay, so whether he really did or whether the authors of the Gospels after the fact had him riding on a white donkey, the idea is if Jesus is the Messiah, then he's got to be riding on a white donkey to prove it. Okay, so you can't sell Eitz Terubalin, Benot Shuach, Pitot Tarot, frankincense, and a white rooster to Gentiles. And there's a halacha here, a white rooster, etc. It is permitted to sell items that are used as idolatrous offerings along with objects that are not used for such purposes, provided that the Gentile does not specify that he wants the item specifically for idol worship. For example, if one sells black frankincense along with white frankincense, he need not be concerned that the Gentile might separate the frankincense that can be used for idol worship. All right, so sometimes, as we're going to see in the next sentence, you can bundle these things together with other things and then don't have to worry specific. But if it's just the one thing that you're selling that's used for idol worship, then you can assume with certainty that you cannot sell it to the pagan because they're going to be using it for idol worship. Rabbi Yehuda says it is permitted to sell a white rooster to a Gentile, provided that it's sold along with the other types of roosters. Okay, but the halacha down there, this can apply to the other things too, not just to white roosters. But when it's sold by itself, one should cut off its toe and sell it to the Gentile, because they do not sacrifice a defective animal to their object of idol worship. Okay, so there's a little background here, because they do not sacrifice a defective animal. It's evident from contemporary writings of pagan cults that although they were not concerned about every blemish that would render an offering unfit by Torah law, they would ensure that there would be no visible defect on any animal that served as an offering. So the rabbis kind of knew from their neighbors what the basic requirements were for an animal. So if they just cut off the toe of the rooster, then you could you can cut off its toe, and then you know that it's not going to be used for sacrifice. And the Mishnah goes on, and with regard to all remaining items, without specification, it is permitted to sell them, but with specification, it is prohibited to sell them. Rabbi Meir says, even in the case of a good palm tree, chatzav and naklav, it is prohibited to sell them to Gentiles. So you have this one list, and then Rabbi Meir adds more to the list, and the Mishnah says anything that if the idol worshiper says to the Jewish vendor, I want to buy this for idol worship, you're not allowed to sell it to them. Okay, so now the Gamara is going to comment on this. The Gamara analyzes the terms in the Mishnah. What is the meaning of Eitz Terubalin? Right, so we already learned in background on the previous page that it's a round object, or it could be pine cones. This is the plant known as toranita. Toranita. There is a note here. According to Rashi, so we don't know what toranita is. That's the problem. When the Gamara or the Mishnah uses terms that are just assumed that we know, Like, in other words, you're translating one unknown term, eats terubalin, with another term that is unknown, toranita. And if you don't continue to explain what that is, then we're left in a bind later on in our generation, because we have no idea what either of those terms means. So we're left to Rashi. We don't know how reliable Rashi is, because Rashi's 500 years after the Gemara is edited. Okay, so in other words, it's like asking, it's almost equivalent. What did George Washington mean by some reference in his diary when we're looking at his diary today? So we might know, but we might not know. So toranita, according to Rashi, toranita is a type of cedar. Okay, so again, back to that background on the previous page. Okay, maybe it's the cedar pine cone. The Gamara in Tractate Rosh Hashanah 23a says it's the tree referred to as the Shita in the Bible. The Shita is the, you know what? I'm not sure what that is. I was going to think about one kind of plant, but I'm not sure what it is. Others dispute this identification, as it's clear from the continuation of the Gemara that the toranita has no roots. Tosafot, which are the generation after Rashi, therefore explain that toranita has two meanings: a type of cedar and a type of dirt, as is the case here. So why you would sell dirt? So, well, this is the plant known as toranita. Okay, so if it's either a plant or it's dirt. And the Gemara raises a contradiction from a Baraita. Okay, so we have a source from the time of the Mishnah that might help us understand what eats terubalin or toranita is. The sages added to the list of plants whose use is prohibited during the sabbatical year: alexin, eats terubalin, muchsasin, and benot shuach. And if it would enter your mind to say that Utz terubalin is toranita, is there toranita that is subject to the halachot of the sabbatical year? So we're doing a tangent now on understanding this plant and whether a sabbatical year laws apply to it. So just in brief, and that's all we need to focus on, because it's just a tangent. We're going to get back to the idol worship and relations with non-Jews momentarily, but just so we understand what the rabbis are doing. Sabbatical year. You're not allowed to cultivate your land in the sabbatical year. You're not allowed to benefit from produce that grows. You can use the produce, but if the land grows the produce on its own in the sabbatical year, you can use it, but you can't derive other benefits from it, and you certainly can't plant your land. And so then the question is, what kind of plants does this apply to? Okay, so the Gemara explains, but didn't we learn in a Baraita that this is the principle? Anything that has a root and grows is subject to the halachot of the sabbatical year, and anything that does not have a root is not subject to the halachot of a sabbatical year? If so, toranita, which has no roots, is not subject to the halachot of the sabbatical year, and therefore it cannot be identified as eats terubalin. Rather, Rav Safra says, what is eats terubalin? It is the fruit of the cedar tree. So now I don't know. So I guess pine cones are the fruit of different types of pine trees, and they do, I guess, like pine nuts. I don't know which pine trees specifically pine nuts come from, but that could be the fruit of pine trees. So the fruit of a cedar tree could be the pine cone, which could have nuts in it for all we know. And similarly, when Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael, he said that Rabbi Elazar said eats terubalin is the fruit of the cedar tree. Okay, so that's what you're not allowed to sell specifically to a non-Jew, because the fruit of the cedar tree the Gamara is agreeing that eats terubalin is the fruit of the cedar tree that is used for idol worship, and you can't sell that to a non-Jew. The Mishnah includes benot shuach. That's another kind of thing you're not supposed to sell to the to an idol worship. Among the items one may not sell to a Gentile, Rabba Bar Chana says, the Rabbi Yochanan says, these are white figs. So what are benot shuach? These are specifically white figs. There are a whole variety of figs out there. We're limited in our knowledge of figs from what the produce section in the supermarket sells, but from what I understand, there's all different kinds of figs out there. I think just like all different kinds of grapes produce all different kinds of wine, all different kind of figs too have different flavors. The Mishnah states, so benot shuach are white figs. White figs, maybe by the Gentiles, are used for idol worship. The Mishnah states, and pitoratot. What are pitotarot? Rabba Bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says this is another type of fruit. Rather, the Mishnah here taught that the sale of the various fruits listed in the Mishnah is prohibited only where they are sold when they are with their stems, not if they have been pruned. Okay, so this idea is if they're pruned, that is if their stems are off, can't be used for idol worship, so it's okay to sell them to the Gentile. The Mishnah taught that selling frankincense to Gentiles is prohibited. Rabbi Yitzchak says that Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says the Mishnah is referring specifically to pure frankincense, which is used as incense for objects of idol worship. A sage taught, and with regard to all of these items whose sale is prohibited, one may sell to Gentiles a large bundle of merchandise, as it is clear that the Gentile intends to sell the merchandise rather than sacrifice it to his object of idol worship, right? So if you're in the wholesale business, it's okay. But if you're in retail specifically with this one item, not good. But if you're bundling items together with other items like frankincense is a kind of incense, if you bundle it with other kinds of incense too, okay, that's okay. Or the figs, if you bundle white figs with other kinds of figs, or the white rooster with other roosters, it's okay in that way to sell the item. And how much does a bundle weigh, right? In other words, how much is something considered a bundle that is considered okay to sell? Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera explained, for the purpose of this halacha, no bundle is less than a weight of 300 dinars. So I think 300 dinars is substantial, and that's enough to make sure that that item that could be used for idol worship is lost among the rest of the items that are being sold. Okay, so that's so far, this is how we can get around. In other words, how do we want to make sure that the impact of prohibited sales is least possible for the Jew? Okay, so in other words, it's tough to make a living no matter when one is living in Israel or Babylonia or any time. And so if you want to make sure that Jews can still make a living, because we're living with non-Jews, so of course, anything we sell might be used for inappropriate purposes, but we have to make a living. But there's a limit to making a living which would impact our own sense of morality. So it's one thing to know that white roosters are used for pagan idol worship, but if they're buying all kinds of roosters from you, not just a white rooster, then it's okay. And you can't be absolutely sure that they're going to end up using that white rooster for idol worship. But just the one, that's the limit. That if you're just selling that one, sorry, we have to limit your sale in this way. We can't let you do that. Yes, Steve.
It seems to me that one of the themes that runs through the Talmud is that the rabbis always seem to find a way around the strictness of these prohibitions.
Yeah.
And sometimes in very convoluted ways, but nevertheless, it just seems like that always seems to be a common.
Yes. So, which is, it's absolutely true, Steve. And right. So the rabbis, Judaism today is based on how the rabbis interpreted the Torah. And I would say, personally, I'm thankful for the rabbis for doing this because they allow for interpretation of the text. So one principle that the rabbis use in their approach to halacha, or in their approach to interpreting Torah law, is that the Torah says we're supposed to live by these laws and not die by them. Okay, so if you're coming up with some underlying principles for law, one principle is we have to love our neighbor as ourselves. So law has to be respectful of our fellow human beings. Another principle of law is that we need to live by these laws. They can't be so restrictive that we're figuratively dying. We can't live. So I think that that's an element that's at play here. Jews are the minority no matter where they're living. In the time of the rabbis, whether it's in the land of Israel or in Babylonia or throughout history, we are the minorities, except in the state of Israel today. Otherwise, we're the minority wherever we are. So in order to live, it's very hard to make a living just by doing business with other Jews. It's very hard. So there are 2 kosher supermarkets in our area. They manage to make a living, and that's a business that caters to Jews mostly. But when I'm at Moti's or Shalom's, I think there are non-Jews shopping in there too. But they're not relying on non-Jews for their business. They're relying on Jews for their business. But if you're a lawyer, if you're a doctor, if you're an insurance salesman, and you limit your business just to Jews, you're going to have a tough time making a living. Okay, so the rabbis knew that. If you're a farmer and you're selling only to Jews, you might have a tough time making a living because, yeah, there could be Jews in your neighborhood, but, not all Jews are going to be shopping from you enough for you to make a living. So the rabbis realized that. Okay, so it just so happens you have a white rooster. Are you raising white roosters? Who knows if you're raising white, but if you are raising white roosters, then you're in bad luck if you're only going to sell the white rooster to non-Jews, because you can't. So you have to understand the society in which you're living, which is also a major point that the rabbis are saying. We're not supposed to live in a vacuum. We understand that we have to be aware of our surroundings just for our own well-being so that we stay alive, and for the relationship with these non-Jewish people so that we can live safely and hopefully in freedom. So that means doing business. So you want to maintain your Jewish identity, and you don't want to tarnish yourself by allowing idol worship to take place. You want to ensure in your Jewish practice that you are maintaining God as the supreme God in the universe. And if you sell a white rooster to a non-Jew, to an idol worshiper, you're essentially saying that idols exist, and you recognize that the idol is important. And if you're doing that, you are diminishing your relationship with God. But you're not doing that if you sell white roosters with brown roosters and red roosters. So yeah, Steve, I get your point that it's splitting hairs, but for the rabbis, it's important. It's important to split these hairs so that we can make a living.
I think
Yes.
I think it's a paradox then that the ultra-Orthodox, whether in this country or in Israel, don't seem to learn this lesson.
I totally agree. I totally agree. And I believe that the ultra-Orthodox are not the Torah true Jews that they claim to be. Because I think Torah true Jews are people who interpret the Talmud, interpret the Torah in the way the rabbis did, and allow for the possibility of new interpretations to exist. So that, but that's me, and I tell you, it's a challenging time to be a non-ultra-Orthodox Jew in the state of Israel today with that. But we'll see what happens. There was a major protest in Tel Aviv last night, 80,000 people protesting these potential judicial reforms with little disturbance with the police, so that's good. It was a peaceful protest. We'll see what happens. But at the same time, Times of Israel is reporting that even though the Attorney General of Israel is saying that the Sephardi head of the Sephardic political party, Deri, should not be allowed to sit as a minister because he's a convicted felon, the cabinet is going to change the law to allow him to sit anyway. So, crazy stuff is happening in Israel now related to Jewish law becoming the law of the state of Israel, which means ultra-Orthodox Jewish law becoming the law of Israel, and versus the secular Jews who want to live free of imposition from the state rabbinate. Yeah, Debbie or Jesse.
But don't the ultra-Orthodox demonstrate the fallacy that Jews have to make concessions or have to allow exceptions to some of these rules, because the ultra-Orthodox prove that it is possible to live according to Torah, strictly to Torah, and to make a living, as it were.
So I'm not sure how many of the ultra-Orthodox Jews are making a living actually by doing work and getting a salary versus ultra-Orthodox being supported by donations, whether it's from the state of Israel subsidizing ultra-Orthodox yeshivas and students, allowing ultra-Orthodox students to have a pass on not having to serve in the army, and ultra-Orthodox here in America also. I'm not sure how many are making a living and how many are living off of the dole. So again, I don't want to go far afield here and with critiquing the ultra-Orthodox community. I only want to say that the ultra-Orthodox or any kind of fundamentalist Jew is not what the rabbis here in the Gamara have in mind. The rabbis have in mind living as Jewish in a non-Jewish world and how to maintain as strong a Jewish identity as possible while also being able to survive. Okay, and I think that the ultra-Orthodox is a response to modernity. It absolutely is a response to modernity, and specifically a response to assimilation. And okay, Gesundheit. You can have your way of life if you want, but just don't impose your way of life on me. No, thank you. But that's, people in Israel just don't have the wherewithal to enforce that idea of not allowing the ultra-Orthodox to impose their way of life on everybody else. Like there was a thought a week ago that the ultra-Orthodox didn't want transportation infrastructure projects to happen on Shabbat. They wanted to impose that new restriction on construction projects. The Tel Aviv light rail is being built. The Jerusalem light rail is being built and expanded. The train system is being built and expanded. And the Ultraorthodox don't want work to happen on Shabbat. And the transportation ministry is saying, screw you, part of the same government. But now they've walked back that screw you, and they've reached a compromise. Only safety measures will happen on Shabbat, not regular construction projects. So, okay. So let's go on here. So the bundle that could include objects that are being used for idol worship mixed in with other objects, that bundle has to weigh 300 dinars. Okay. The Gamara raises a difficulty, but let us be concerned lest the buyer go and sell these items to another Gentile and they sacrifice them. Okay, so I sell to Barbara, and then Barbara sells to Debbie. Barbara didn't use the white rooster for a sacrifice, but Debbie's going to use it. Am I still responsible for selling a white rooster for the use of idol worship to a non-Jew, even though it was indirect? I sold it to Barbara. It's not mine anymore. It's off my hands. But Barbara sold it to Debbie. So the white rooster's pedigree goes back to me by way of Barbara. Is that still impactful enough to prevent me from selling the white rooster? So, but let us be concerned lest the buyer go and sell these items to another Gentile and they sacrifice them. Abaye said in response, this scenario is certainly possible, but we are commanded only not to place a stumbling block before the blind. That is, one may not be the direct cause of a Gentile's idol worship. Okay. Placing a stumbling block before the blind. This is an important religious principle, which isn't meant to be taken literally. It's an important statement from Leviticus 19. It's part of what's known as the Holiness Code. A number of statements in chapters 19 and 20 of Leviticus, which state what we are supposed to do to maintain our holy religious identity. And this statement, placing a stumbling block before the blind, yes, it's meant to be taken literally, right? Don't, you can imagine people laughing at somebody else's expense. So you see a blind person walking down the street, and stupid, moronic bullies are putting a stumbling block there and assuming that the blind person's going to trip over it. Ha ha ha! Isn't that funny? But that is not only what the rabbis are saying that statement to mean. It is also meant to be understood. The blind could be the ignorant. So a religious Jew is not supposed to sell something that is not kosher to an ignorant Jew. Okay, so there have been cases in America in which, and this happened in DC. I think my first year here, there used to be a kosher restaurant in Potomac, on 7 Locks Road. There used to be a kosher Chinese restaurant, and the kosher Chinese restaurant closed. I don't even remember the name of it, but I ate there once. It was cited by, somehow the mashgiach did not notice that the owner of the restaurant was buying chicken, non-kosher chicken, and selling it as kosher. That is placing a stumbling block before the blind, okay? Passing something off as kosher to the blind Jewish community, thinking that the blind Jewish community thinking that it's kosher. So that's just one example. And so this even applies, the Abaye is saying, this even applies to our business with non-Jews. So you can't you can't help a non-Jew um, uh, worship idols, because that's putting a stumbling block before them, being blind to God as opposed to worshiping their idol instead. So so Abaye said, but it only applies in the direct sales. So in this, my example again, Barbara in this case being a pagan and Debbie being a pagan. So I'm not allowed to sell the white rooster to Barbara. So that's what Abaye is saying. But I don't have to worry if it's in a bundle, if Barbara then sells it, the white rooster, to Debbie, knowing it's being used for idol worship. It's one Gentile selling to another, and I don't have to worry about violating, putting a stumbling block before the blind. Okay. We are not commanded to place a stumbling block before one who may subsequently place it before the blind, right? So it's enough to worry about what we're doing. We can't also then have to worry about what other people are subsequently going to be doing. Okay, we have to do our best to for our own behavior and how we behave to people around us. We can't we don't have the power to control how people then go on to behave to the people around them. So our ripple effect only goes in one wave, to the people immediately around us. The ripple effect, we can't control what happens beyond the people around us. Okay, so we go on. So a slightly different topic. So the Mishnah teaches, and it's prohibited to sell a white rooster to a Gentile. Rabbi Yona says that Rabbi Zera says that Rav Zevid says the following ruling. And there are those who teach merely that Rabbi Yona says that Rabbi Zera says it. Okay, so whether it's Rabbi Zera or Rabbi Zera in the name of Rabbi Zevid, if a Gentile says, who has a rooster, without specifying any particular type, it's permitted to sell him a white rooster. But if he says, who has a white rooster, it's prohibited to sell him a white rooster. So that's interesting. So in other words, we're trying to play out the circumstance that might happen in the marketplace. So we know white roosters are for sacrifice, but other colored roosters are not. So if a pagan is saying, I want to buy a rooster, well, you can sell him a white rooster, because he's asking for a rooster, but not a white one. So in other words, you don't know what he's using the rooster for. But if he's asking for a white rooster, well, then you know that he wants to make a sacrifice, and that you can't sell. So, so what Yona is adding here is the intent of the Gentile for his purchase. So if he's just asking for a regular rooster, then it doesn't matter what color rooster you sell him, because it seems that his intent is not idol worship. Okay? The Gemara raises an objection to this opinion. We learned in the Mishnah that Rabbi Yehuda says he may sell a white rooster to a Gentile, provided that it's sold along with other types of roosters. What are the circumstances? If we say that the Gentile says, who has a white rooster, who has a white rooster, in that case, one may not provide him a white rooster, even if it's sold along with other roosters, as the Gentile specified that he wants a white rooster. Okay, so in other words, we're kind of clarifying the position in the Mishnah. Even if you're allowed to sell a mixed bundle of things, you can't sell that mixed bundle of things to a Gentile who specifically says he wants a white rooster. So in other words, you can't make your money. So that level of loophole, Steve, cannot apply in this case. So the loophole of being able to sell a whole bundle of things does not apply to the Gentile who says specifically he wants a white rooster. Okay, so there's a limit even with the loophole of the whole bundle of all different types of roosters. In that case, you cannot, in that case, get away with making money off of idolatry. Okay. Rather, is it not referring to a case where the Gentile says, who has a rooster, who has a rooster, without mentioning a white rooster? And even so, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if he sells him a white rooster along with the other roosters, then yes, it's permitted, but selling only a white rooster by itself is not permitted, right? So in other words, previously Rabbi Yona says you can't sell a white rooster at all, but maybe you can sell a white rooster. So what happens if the guy says, I want a white rooster? Right, so we're trying to figure out the details of this, and one can infer that according to the first Tana, the first statement in the Mishnah, who prohibits the sale of a white rooster, one may not sell him a white rooster even if it's sold along with other roosters. This does not accord with the statement of Rabbi Yona, who says that if the Gentile says who has a rooster without specifying any type, it's permitted to sell him even a white rooster. So can you include the white rooster in a bundle or not? Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said the Mishnah is not discussing the case of a Gentile who asks for a rooster without specifying its color, as everyone agrees that in such a situation it is permitted to sell him a white rooster. Rather, here we're dealing with a case where the Jew had several different roosters, and the Gentile says, pointing to different roosters, sell me this one and that one, and one of the roosters he chose was white. So, in that case, the Gentile saying that he wants a whole slew of roosters, then it's okay to do that. The Gamara notes that this explanation is also taught in a Baraita. Rabbi Yehuda said, when is selling a white rooster prohibited? It is prohibited when the Gentile said, sell me this white rooster. But if he said, sell me this one and that one, it is permitted. And even if he said, sell me this rooster, and he pointed to a white rooster, in the case of a Gentile who's preparing a feast for his son, or who has a sick person in his house, it is permitted to sell it to him, as it is clear that he wants it for the celebration for his son or for the sick person, not for idol worship. So we have this idea mentioned earlier in the Gemara as well, regarding other items as well. If the Gentile is saying specifically, I'm not using this for idol worship, I'm using it for a feast or for helping the sick person in my house, right? Making chicken soup back then was a curative. So then it's okay, because the Gentile is saying to you that it's not being used for idol worship. So perhaps that is allowed. So either selling a white rooster is not allowed at all because it's going to be used for idol worship, or it's allowed if the Gentile says, I'm not using it for idol worship, or I'm using it for some other purpose. Yes, Jesse.
So this is maybe partly designed to bail out the poor farmer, the Jewish farmer who gets stuck with a lot of white roosters. And what do you do with all of the white roosters? So first, right. Can the Jew cook that white rooster himself without violating any? Oh
yeah, roosters are kosher, not based on the color, but based on the internal organs. Mm-hmm. Okay, they have to be inspected. So color doesn't matter to Jewish people. It matters apparently to Gentiles because white roosters are used for idol worship.
Yeah, so all that, if they're going to leverage this, all that has to happen is that the purchaser understands that if he can get a white rooster as long as he doesn't ask for it.
Right. So it's possible that the vendor is going to say, I'm not allowed to sell you this white rooster if you're going to be using it for idol worship. But if you tell me you're not using it for idol worship, I'm happy to sell it to you. So yeah, that is a way around. That's assuming that you're not going to insult the Gentile by saying that. There could be some Gentiles who would say, who are you, Jew, to tell me what to do with this? If I want to buy it, I want to buy it. That could happen. There could be times throughout our history that that's the case. and you take your life in your hand by engaging in conversation with a Gentile, especially when it comes to their worship, right? So you have to be very careful on how this so-called conversation is happening. Who's initiating it? Is it the Jew or is it the Gentile?
I mean, it just seems that this is an invitation to subterfuge, like to work around the law in a way that actually violates the spirit of the law, but is consistent with the letter of it.
Well, but then I would say, the law is specifically, Jews are not supposed to worship idols. And the rabbis are saying that means that we are also not supposed to encourage idol worshipers to worship idols. Because by encouraging idol worshipers to worship idols, it's as if we're worshiping idols too, because we're condoning idol worship to take place. So how do we get around it? One way to get around it is not to deal with idol worshipers at all. But that's not an option when Jews are in the minority and idol worshipers are all around. So then you have to try to figure out how to make a living when there aren't so many Jews around. Like it's like the Jews who came to America and went up and down the Mississippi River Valley. Some of those Jews were the only Jews if they settled in a particular town in Mississippi or Arkansas. Okay, so they're doing business with non-Jews. So, and if the only place to buy a Christmas tree might be in this general store run by a Jew in Japip, Arkansas, what's the Jew to do? So, right, so you have to try to understand, I'm trying to be Jewish. The only way I can survive is living here, because being Jewish back in Russia where I was really dangerous, and so I needed to escape. So what am I going to do? So these are the questions that Jews had. So one way the Gamara is giving an out is by saying, okay, well maybe the idol worshiper is saying it's not, I'm not using it for idol worship. Okay, so the other thing is, can he take the word of an idol worshiper? Is an idol worshiper honest? There are other places in the Gemara where it says you can't trust an idol worshiper for anything, right? Remember when we studied a couple of years ago the laws of lost and found? Something's lost in a majority, a public square in a majority pagan town. You can take advantage of that and just take it, because who cares about these non-Jews? Right, so you have that one attitude: who are these non-Jews? We don't care about them. And at the same time, our life is in our hands, and we're at risk in living amongst them. So you got to balance all of these things in order to maintain your Jewish identity, maintain your faith in God, and not want to diminish your faith in God that much. So let's read this last paragraph for today before the red S. We'll stop there. The Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in a Mishnah all the way back on page 8a? In the case of a Gentile who made a feast for his son, engaging in business is prohibited only on that day and with that man alone. This indicates that in any event, conducting business on that day and with that man is prohibited. Rav Yitzchak bar Rav Sharshia said, the Baraita is speaking about a picnic. That is a social gathering rather than a wedding feast. A mere social gathering does not include the sacrifice of offerings to idolatry. So it even depends what kind of gathering it is, and we have to know what kind of gathering it is and whether idol worship is going to happen at that gathering or not. Betavu zig. So there's language there. Tavu zig from the Middle Iranian word tozig, meaning picnic. So just interesting there. So if you think that at a picnic, idol worship isn't going to happen, let me tell you a story. Several summers ago, we met up with cousins of Lenore in Israel, and we had a picnic there, like a barbecue, kind of like for this family gathering. And And we stopped at one point to daven mincha. So, these are Orthodox relatives of Lenore. So we're davening mincha. So just a regular kind of family gathering, we're davening mincha. So I would imagine at a regular family gathering, somebody might pull out an idol and say, hey, it might be appropriate for this family gathering to give gratitude to this particular idol. So I don't know if whether at just a mere social gathering, idol worship doesn't take place. But it just, so, okay, so the rabbis are saying regular social gatherings, all right, we gotta allow this, we can't prohibit sales of things to non-Jews. All right. We'll stop here for today. We'll continue next Sunday, and hope everybody has a good rest of the day and a meaningful Martin Luther King weekend. Take care, all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.